times. There's 2006 and 2011. In 2011, we had 109 on the High Council, which was at that time the largest number. I think in 2000, the last one was even a little larger. We're almost out. We're very crowded in the High Council chamber at some report now, but I think that will level off because it's a beautiful, beautiful setting there. The Catholic Church has cardinals instead of commissioners. The Catholic Church has about 150 cardinals, but that's not a lot more than we have, 109. So it's a very similar thing. The difference is that the Catholic Church represents 2 billion people, a little over 1 billion people, and we 1,001,000. So we're a lot smaller, but we are organized very similarly. When during the 5 years that we met with the Catholic Church, conversations with the Catholic Church, the 2 times we were in Rome, we stayed in 2 different locations. The last time we were in Rome, which was 2012, we stayed in a place they had built inside the walls for the cardinals when they come to elect a pope. That's the main purpose. While they're not electing a pope, it's a conference center. It's just inside the gates. If you've been to the St. Peter's, going in to the gate there, you'll know that there are the Swiss guards who are at the gate. And they will not let anyone in. But if you live, as we did, for a week in that conference center, you have a gold key and jade on it. It's a jade color. And how proud we felt. We'd go up to the Swiss guards and we'd show them the key. And they'd say, "Come right here." Oh, it's a wonderful. We call it the gold key experience. The gold key. Now, it's very interesting. I lived in room 201, and they're very simple rooms. It's a nice room with a little dining area, kitchenette, no televisions, and you go in then to a bedroom, single bed, and a bathroom. So very, very simple but nice. I was in room 201. And I was watching television, I think it was 60 Minutes, about 6 months ago, gave a story about the Vatican. And lo and behold, we discovered that the Pope Francis, no relation, Pope Francis decided not to live in the luxurious papal apartments. And he went to live in the same house where we had these meetings. And he was on the 2nd floor, but he was in room 226. So he's just down the hallway. But he's an interesting pope, isn't he? And really loved by the people. And when General Cox went to meet him, and General Cox presented him with this book, this is published by the Salvation Army International Headquarters. You're welcome to look at it. There's some pictures here of all the groups that met. We had 6 Salvationists and 6 from the Vatican, from the Catholic Church. The Army published this, and all of the papers are in here. All of the reports, everything. So when General Cox gave this to the Pope, the Pope took it and said, "I have a story about the Salvation Army." He said, "I grew up in Argentina, And back in Argentina in those days, as it is in many places around the world, there was no dealings between the Catholics and the Protestants. Both were suspicious of each other. Do you understand? We experienced it, especially in the former generation, and still we see that in our society. So he said, I was 5 years old, and I was taught to never speak to a Protestant. Okay? 5 years old. He said, I was walking down the streets of Argentina with my grandmother, and we came upon 2 ladies with these bonnets. Ejército de Salvación on the bonnet. And I said to my grandmother, who are those people? She said, they are Protestants, but they are very fine people. And Pope Francis said, that was my first understanding of ecumenism. He said that was the first time that he can remember, and he's only 5 years old, so it's a very early, very, very early memory. But he says, I remember what my grandmother said, and I have always respected and loved the Salvation Army. So that goes back to the conversations with the Catholic Church. As with the Catholic Church are the commissioners of the world. Let me just, yes, the commissioners of the world meet to elect another general. In addition to commissioners are all of the full colonels who are in charge of a command and their spouses. That's why our number went from about in the 80s, I think about 86 in 2006, to 109. So it was a larger. In 2011, it was the first time there were more women in the High Council than men. I think there were six more women than men. That was new. That was unusual. So 2011 was a big change in the dynamics of the High Council. The High Council is called by the Chief of the Staff. And by the way, any Chief of the Staff and 5 territorial commanders can call for a High Council. So when we say the general is in charge, he or she is, the fact is that 5 territorial commanders plus the general, 5 territorial commanders plus the chief of the staff can call for a High Council, or 10 territorial commanders without the chief of the staff. So see, the Army has provided for unusual circumstances when, for some reason, the feeling is that the general should be deposed, and that happened once, in 1929. Now, I hope you have read General John Larson's book, 1929. If you have not, please put it at the top of your reading list. It is a page-turner. You can't put it down. Let me promise you right away that John Larson writes so well, and you can't put it down. You just keep turning the page. All of the details of this famous 1929 High Council are there. The Army was in a critical point in its existence. It could have disintegrated in 1929 for the reason that the general Booth had died in 1912, and in the safe in his office, and that he only had he and an outside lawyer had the combination, not anybody in the Army. But he put in that safe the name of the persons who followed him. That was the system. And of course we know that he put in his son, who was then the chief of staff, Bramwell Booth. So after General Booth died, they opened the safe. There it was, Bramwell Booth. Now Bramwell became very old and, in fact, to all practical purposes, a bit senile to be replaced. The founder, General William Booth, did put into place the possibility of a high council. He took into account there may be a time when the general is disabled. Now, when by the way, he died about 6 months after the high council, but it was council. That's why one of the territorial commanders had a heart attack at the high council. One of the key players in the 1929 high council, of course, Evangeline Booth was there. Evangeline was there. And one of the other key players was Samuel Logan Bringle. Bringle attended the high council. Remember, he's not a territorial commander, but he was a commissioner. He was one of the few non-territorial commanders that had the rank of commissioner because of his writings and influence on the army. He was at the high council, and the record shows that he became a real catalyst to bringing these groups together. He was a holy man of God, highly respected. And at first he supported keeping Bramwell Booth as the general. He was a company man. Let's follow the rules. He was in a delegation that was sent to London during the High Council to plead with General Bramwell to relinquish his position. But you see, General Bramwell felt very loyal to his father, loyal to the system, to the old system, which was an autocratic system, and the answer was no. His daughter was at the High Council. Not his daughter, his wife came to the High Council and pleaded for her husband. This is a High Council filled with drama. And Evangeline was on the other side of the aisle. You think the Democrats and Republicans are on different sides of the aisle. It was Evangeline also felt that her brother should relinquish the position. And so she was on the other side. This caused a real rift in their relationship, of course. Now, I'm not going to say much more because I want you to read the book. It is, and when you put the book down, you say, thank God for these men and women of integrity who went through the fire and the waters of almost splitting the army in half and therefore dissolving it. And it was at this High Council. The feelings were so bad that is not a good word for it. They were so intense and so emotional that the next High Council, they decided not to go back to Sudbury Court. It was that, because of the memories. And they went to, I believe it was Clapham Congress Hall. Clapham Congress Hall. But interestingly enough, when you go to Sudbury Court, you go in and see all the pictures of all High Councils. You'll see a High Council that elected Higgins, the Chief of the Staff. And it meets exactly, it's all in the Salvation Army Act of 1980, which is just a revision of the original deed poll that I referred to before. Here is a letter dated the 17th of January, 2011. It's to all members of the General's Consultative Council. I didn't mention this before, but the General has the General's Consultative Council that meets about 4 times a year made up of all the commissioners at IHQ, all the commissioners at IHQ, plus 5 or 6, maybe even a little more from around the world, and they're rotating, so every time these 5 or 6 are different. And they talk about big things, not big, even bigger than the IMC. They talk about the Junior Soldier Program, or whatever it is. I gave a presentation there once to the GCC on holiness. So these are the big issues of the day, the sacraments, big issues of the day that would be discussed at the General Consultative Council. And it says it's regarding the Salvation Army Act of 1980, and it's from Commissioner Kenneth Potter. You know, Ken is from the West Coast. He's now Territorial Commander in Kenya West. And he is the legal constitutional advisor to the General. Now, you can flip through this sometime. The foreword is, all of this here is the Act. Salvation Army Act of 1980, Chapter 3 there, and it goes the Army, the powers of the General, and accounts, paragraph, sections, mortgages, common investment schemes, power of investment respecting certain Army trusts, duty in choosing investments, the High Council, the Salvation Army trustee, all of this, and every member of the High Council is expected to read this document with next to a dictionary, because it's legalese in many cases, and to know what our deed poll is. This is very important for members of the High Council as they meet to elect a new general. So we read it carefully. We are summoned to Sunbury Court, and this is the notebook that you receive. This is the 2006 High Council. And all of the pages here that everyone apparently has read, beginning with the High Council, it has everybody's picture there. All members of the High Council. They're listed. There's a little bio of every person in the High Council. And then you start with information. Introducing the 2006 High Council, preliminary information and it indicates what every other High Council has done. Adoption of orders of procedure. It becomes very procedural and confidential, and everybody, for those 2 weeks, the average High Council lasted about 10 days. Because, unlike the Catholic Church, those who have stood for nomination, those who have been nominated and agreed to stand, many people do, are nominated, and then decide not to stand. But those who stand, when the vote is taken, the one with the fewest votes must drop out. At the same time, every other person in the group has an opportunity to drop out if they see the way the votes are going. Unlike in the Catholic Church, you can never drop out. The Catholic Church just keeps voting and putting up the black smoke every day until finally somebody wins the 2/3. And ours is 2/3 also. 2/3 must elect the general on the first 3 votes. If no one gets 2/3 after the 3rd vote, the 4th vote goes to a simple majority. That's half plus 1. 2/3 plus 1. So it's very similar, but there are those differences. That's why it takes the Catholic Church a little longer sometimes than the Army, because every time we have to vote, someone drops out. And as I said, 10 days, but you're supposed to give at least 3 weeks on your calendar to block it out because you know that you're there. It's sequestered until the general is elected. You must read all of these documents here. Here's the constitutional memorandum on the constitutional background of the High Council. Peter Smith, who's our constitutional expert, and with us. He is the officer, he was the legal counsel to the general, and he was one of the few non-council members who were at the council, along with Rob Garrett, who was the assistant to the general, a few other people there that had to keep the agenda moving ahead. Then there's all kinds of schedules, orders of procedures, minutes, and you were supposed to have read, I'm sure everybody did, every word of this in preparation for the High Council. You arrive at Sundry Court. You have everything. The Army does it well, as you know, in all of its meetings. You arrive there. You are welcomed. There's usually 3 days with the general, him or herself, and it's considered a general's consultative council. So the general speaks to the leaders, and it's really his or her last time to do so in that type of setting. It's usually a very spiritual time. Well, I remember them very well. And after those 3 days, the chief of the staff takes charge, and the general is pleasantly but firmly dismissed. And at that point in time, the High Council has total authority in the Army. It's a very unique legal thing. And that is that the general or his spouse or her spouse, the general and the general's spouse, are not allowed to come back to any of the meetings. And ostensibly, they don't even know what's happening. I wonder. But anyway, they don't know what's happening in the meetings. The chief of the staff then is in charge, and his or her first responsibility after bringing devotions, this is we meet, and he or she brings devotions, and his first and only responsibility as chief of the staff is to elect the president of the High Council. The president of the High Council is elected by ballot. And every person is called, and by the way, you're seated and you're called by your tenure. That is, those right in close proximity are the old guys and gals who have been there a long time. Not by age, but by appointment. So you vote, first of all, right away for the president. The nominees then are taken back into a room with the chief of the staff. The chief of the staff tells you how many votes you received, and you are asked if you want to proceed. And I would say that normally everyone who is nominated for any of these positions, there is a real feeling is, why should you say no? This is the High Council, this is God at work, who am I to interrupt in any way what God is saying? So most accept that. I had the privilege in 2011 to become the president of the High Council. And in fact, after you're the president of the High Council, you can really get used to people saying, Mr. President, Mr. President, it's a nice feeling. The feeling lasts for about the 10 days and then it's over. But it's a great responsibility, and you're expected, that's why you have to read all the stuff ahead, because you're expected to know what the procedures are. And you, in fact, for those 10 days, take on the leadership of a group now that has the most power in the Army for those 10 days. I'll tell you how much power. The High Council is not required to do any procedure. The High Council, if they wanted to, although they read everything that happened in the last High Council, the High Council could say, okay, let's vote, and they vote, and the general, they have a general, and that's it. But that doesn't happen. Because there's a lot of tradition, and the first few days, the president of the High Council, can you imagine, it's probably the most difficult position, because you are trying to get 109 territorial leaders to have one mind on any subject. And you go through all of the rules. You go through the rules for the question committee. You go through all of the rules. And invariably, there are very fine leaders who say, no, I think there should be 3 instead of 2. And so you just have to keep smiling and never let them see you sweat. And I'm really being a little facetious in this, because there is always the sense of we're doing God's will, we've got to do it the right way.
And it's all bathed in prayer.
Bathed in prayer. We have the next person who was elected, by the way, is the chaplain. And the chaplain's responsibility is a heavy responsibility for prayer, for singing of hymns, for reading of scripture throughout all of this. And there is very, very little frivolity, if any, as we move forward. It is very respectful of each other, but we all realize day after day why we're there. So the first 3 or 4 days is really approving the rules that we will follow. And those rules are, I would say, 95% the same as the previous High Council, but things have changed. Things do change, and for good reasons. By the way, after the High Council, the Chief of the Staff immediately calls the President and about 5 or 6 members of the High Council to come back to London and review the whole process and set up a whole new list, a proposal, a recommendation, let's say, recommendations for the next High Council. And that was done. In 2011, again, the honor of being nominated for general, felt again, just whatever the Lord wants. So I did. Therefore, they had to elect a whole new president. And it took, goes through the whole process. And they elected Commissioner Jim Nax, who took my place. The vice president, who was also elected, was Betty Mateer. She was with me for the first 6 or 7 days. And her husband was nominated for general. So she felt that she should resign being the vice chair, the vice president. So that had to all be gone through. And Commissioner Brecky, who's now Mrs. Clifton, Commissioner Brecky became the vice chairman. Then the nominations, at one point the nominations began. Very solemn time. There's a little box straight in front of the High Council with a little lock on it. And the head, by the way, there are so many people that are voted on, like I mentioned the chaplain is voted on, and then those who count the votes You vote for that person. There's a head counter, and then there's 3 or 4 others that count the votes, sign that these votes are correct. All the votes after each vote, by the way, are destroyed. In the box, the head teller opens the box and shows everyone that there's nothing in the box. This is not a magic trick, there's just nothing in the box. He closes it, he happened to be a him, and locks it, puts it here. Everybody has a piece of paper. And on that piece of paper, first of all, you have to have, the president has to initial it. So there's never a question that the votes in there were exactly the person that the president gave it to a person. They couldn't come in from outside. That was the idea. So they did initial it. They would come down, they would go out into 2 rooms, and actually there was a possibility of 3 rooms. At one time we used all 3 rooms in the back. And the person could stay there as long as he or she wants to in prayer. It usually wasn't a long time. There was no pressure. And you put down with prayer the person that you are voting for. You come back in, and as you come back in, somebody else's name is called, and that person comes forward to get their ballot. And you come in and you put it in the ballot box. The ballot box then goes to this group of people who count the ballots. They're very careful in counting them. And the head person has to sign that all of the ballots are in. Everybody has to agree. And he gives the ballots then to the principal, to the president. And the numbers of votes are there and given to everyone. This is for all of I'm just doing nominations. So those who receive at least 3 nominations, you can't nominate yourself, are then asked if the president takes them aside. I think there were about 10. Takes them aside, says, you received so many votes. Do you want to proceed? And whatever they say, yes or no, the president reports on that. So-and-so said, oh, he did it. The High Council does not know how many votes people received. Only the person that was nominated knows. And then that person, finally at the end, they go through every person that was nominated and agreed to be nominated, and they say, will you stand for nomination? And you stand up, and you have a chance to express yourself. Basically, it's yes or no. Sometimes people just add a little bit to it. Thank you for this honor. Yes, I will stand. And then I'm going to talk about that. And then after that, they ask the spouse to stand and say, do you agree? Now, of course, this is just a matter of procedure. Right? Everybody knows that the spouse no doubt will agree by this time. By the way, there is a break where the spouses can talk. There's a whole afternoon break where you can pray and make this decision. It's not all procedure. So you have the nominations. When I was nominated and accepted, there were 10. The next day and a half, and I think we pushed it to 2 days, was completely free for everyone except the 10 nominees and their spouses who had to answer questions that the Questions Committee had decided on. that's a whole other procedure that's going on during these days, questions. I think we had about 26 questions. The candidates had to answer. There was more questions in 2006. I think 32 questions. And so in those 2 days, you have to answer the questions. And by the way, you not only answer, you type them out, you answer them. And when you hand them in, officially hand them in, you cannot change your answer. You must read your answer. You are not allowed to edit at all. And that is because when other people are giving their answers, if you're last in line, you may change some of your answers according to what is just human nature. You can't do that. You must. And everybody has your text.
And the spouse as well.
I'm going to get to it. I'm going to get there. And the spouses. Spouses have 6 questions because they're not electing the spouse. They're electing the general. But the spouse, of course, is an integral part in the Army, especially of our team ministry. So the questions are different, but just as important. 6 questions that the spouses have to answer. And they, too, must write out their answers. And it must be exact. It must be exact. I remember on one occasion, one nominee wanted to change something. And there was a whole discussion about this, and it was just one word. Anyway, I don't think it was changed either, because we're following the guidelines, okay? The procedure. So then you stand up. It's all by lot. Whoever comes after each other, they just pick it out of the hat, and you're the next one up. Actually, they do that early so that everybody knows what order they're going to be in. Everybody has their answers there. What do you think about this? If you were general, what would you do about this? What do you think about what is your concept of the chief of the staff's position? All kinds of questions that go through a whole process by all the times these questions are finished. And you can answer as long or as short as you want. You answer the questions, and then you go on. When you're finished, the president of the High Council then said, are there any questions for clarification? Not for amplification, but for clarification. So something you did not understand. So everybody has a chance. Mr. President, I'd like the nominee to indicate, did he or she say this or whatever it is. They have it, the text there. So it's just clarification. What did you mean by? But you couldn't expand on the concept, just answer the question. Then the next one is, this takes a long time. It takes a long time to go through all of these questions. Then the spouses. I believe the spouses come right after the presentation by the candidate, or it could come right at the end, and they all come together. Right after, okay. And again, any clarifications? You move ahead. Then we go back to the beginning, and they draw lots again, and every candidate has a chance to make a speech. No matter, this is your speech. You have to write it out. You make your speech, but there's no time limit to the speech. Actually, I don't think you have to. You make your speech. There's no time limit to the speech. I time it. It's just something that I do because I don't want to go to sleep, so I want to do something. So I time it. The shortest one was 1 minute, 45 seconds. The longest one was 22 minutes. And there have been others that have been longer. I remember a person who had been to many high councils who said to me once, he said, you know, I've heard people talk themselves into and out of being the general in their speeches. You know? So, there's a, you know, it's just human nature, what you're saying in the speech. There can never be applause. There can never be any reaction. And that is tough in speech. Because you don't find anybody shaking their head one way or the other. They're just looking at you like your congregation does sometimes. I have no idea what you're saying, nor do I care. Even though they do. So, most of the time, people are reading as you speak. And you are reading. And they can make little notes, of course, if they'd like to. Now it's not over yet. Because then the candidates are dismissed and the rest of the High Council can ask follow-up questions. Personal questions. Like, you only have 3 years left, for example. What could you hope to accomplish in 3 years? You know, that type of thing. Or you haven't had this certain type of position. Is that going to be a detriment? All of these are fed back to the nominees, and they come in and answer those questions. And they're not frivolous. In fact, that's the job of the questions committee, to take away anything that really doesn't matter. It's a very good questions. Okay? That's it. Then, when the voting begins, the High Council moves very steady and quickly. And that's why once people know that everything's ready for the votes to begin, they realize that it's going to be steady. You keep voting. As I said, in the first 3 votes, you will become the general if you get one more vote than 2/3 of the people present. And this is what we have to sign that we will never reveal that for 10 years. Now, when somebody, of course, when the general is announced very quickly, then you know there weren't too many votes. But it can go, once it goes to the 4th vote, it goes to 50%. And the only reason there would ever be a 5th vote, and there haven't, is that the 4th vote was a tie. If the 4th vote's a tie, then you can go, you have to 5th vote. And it's very steady. After each vote, the names are read in order of the votes that they received. Okay? And at that time, after the votes are given, you can indicate to the president that you would like your name withdrawn. During the break, you just say, like, withdrawn, the president says so-and-so is withdrawn. And then you keep voting. Until finally the president says, I'm pleased to say that we have a new general. And the general, oh, by the way, we do not put white smoke. However, this beautiful place where we meet now, General Rader built this new beautiful facility. Some report because the High Council is growing in number. Beautiful facility. But the windows are all around. It's a circular facility. And when the general is announced, they don't want anyone else to know before everybody, the general is announced to the High Council. So all of the shades, there's a button. All the shades go down. And then the people at the house, they're in the office, they're looking. They have a general, the shades are coming down. And then they announce the general, there's voluminous applause. The general goes from the chamber over to the main building, and where the president is waiting. And the president tells the new general, or the old general, who the new general is. They both come back into the chamber, and the general now, still the general of the Salvation Army, will greet the general-elect, which is usually not, and that general-elect, by the way, doesn't take office for about 2 months. It's on a specific date, except for a few circumstances, and even recent circumstances where the general resigned. And therefore, when General Cox was elected, as soon as his name was announced, he was the general. As soon as his name was announced, because General Linden had resigned. So that was immediate. Normally, there's about two months in between. Then it's not over yet. Everybody, then the general must greet, personally greet every person in high council. So let's say the general's standing here, general-elect, and you come in order of seniority. You come, you greet the general and say whatever you want to them, and they say whatever they want to you. Usually it's a very similar thing. Congratulations. But then you come to what is the holiness table, and you sign your name. You sign your name that so-and-so has been elected, and you recognize. So in the sense, it is 100% the end. No whatever withholds their signature on that. I have been here. I have seen the procedures. I agree with the way the High Council has been run. And after that, let the party begin. And the new general then meets, general-elect meets with the general the next day and talks about everything. That's it. Now, are there any questions? Yes, ma'am. Do we have the Dan?